There is nothing unique about this story, but these are stories that haven't been told in these people's lives. Few even know where Guyana is. Most think it's in Africa, but it's in South America. There are a little more than 850,000 Guyanese living within their own borders. And like many third world countries, poverty runs rampant, leaving many inhabitants to scrape out a meager existence. It's in these humble settings that those eager for survival can find themselves capable of begging, which can lead to prostitution and drugs, which leads to disease, and ultimately death. But it's the children who suffer the most. They are the ones that are orphaned and left behind. The numbers grow daily of helpless children affected and infected with social disease and poverty. How are they to make a difference? Do we really dare to peek into these children's lives and try to understand their pain? Share with me in a brief journey with real people. People who are very much like you and me in their day-to-day routines. How can we reclaim the hope in a generation of children left behind? I was brought to the doorstep of a 76-year-old woman, affectionately known as Granny. Granny and her family live in a place called Plastic City, on the west bank of the opposite side of the Demerara River across from Georgetown. It was named Plastic City because many of the earlier squatters built their homes from scavenged plastic. Now they live among the rising tides of the Atlantic Ocean. And Granny was the first of many to make her home here years ago. She lives very simply in her modest home with and around 15 of her 22 grandchildren. They start their day off in a very similar way to the way we might start our day. They just exist in a more humble setting. One of Granny's daughters was a beggar that turned to prostitution and drugs and alcohol and died of an illness related to AIDS, leaving her child Sabrina orphaned and in Granny's care. Mornings seem to be a quiet time of reflection and filled with chores. There's been no unexpected rain to fill the water barrel outside the front door, so Sabrina will have to make a lengthy trek to a local watering hole to fetch undrinkable water for cleaning. An hour north along the coastline, there's another little girl fetching water in a place called Parika, also known as the Sea Dam area. Plastic City is a very impoverished location, but the Sea Dam area seems to audibly groan under the weight of its own depression. The despair of poverty knows no religion. It knows no boundaries. It has no rules. It knows no prejudice. It feeds off of itself, consuming itself, leaving only the bare bones of survival. These boys start their days off laboring under the weight of heavy sacks filled with gravel, often weighing as much as or more than they do. And they do this as a necessity to help feed their younger brothers and sisters, because most of their mothers are beggars and their fathers are mostly extinct, absent from their lives due to death, abandonment, disease, or imprisoned for unspeakable abuses. They make just enough by the end of a harsh, tiring day to buy food for just that day. And tomorrow they'll do the same to survive for one more day. Child labor laws don't seem to apply when there's hunger in their bellies, and their younger brothers and sisters rely on them to eat. These children have been forced to grow up in early life. They've had to take on the role of a man before they were allowed to be a child. Granny has 13 children. All have died but 4. 2 have died of an illness related to AIDS, and one of those 2 gave birth to a little girl named Serena, Sabrina's sister. She was infected with HIV through her mother and died 2 months after her 3rd birthday. She was barely offered a functional childhood before she passed away. But death seems to be commonplace here among the poor, running hand in hand with the few choices poverty seems to propose. I was amazed when I came across another one of Granny's grandchildren dragging a plastic bag with a string attached to it. The other children's toys were mostly marbles and playing spontaneous games on the dirt roads between the shacks. But this little girl's toy was a bag and a string, and it struck me as interesting that she could find so much joy in something so simple. And when was the last time I was content with something as simple as a plastic bag and a string? I often wonder where Granny went to in her thoughts. I know she grieved silently for the deaths of her children. Did she revisit the tough years she worked in sugar cane and rice fields? Was she haunted by the 20 years she spent begging and sending her children to beg? I think what struck me as odd the most is that I began to see there was a hierarchy in the ranks of poverty. People that had a little more than the next person would look down their noses at the people with less. How strange that our need to be better than someone else takes precedence over giving a helping hand when we all are in need. Are we all not God's children? Are we all not broken? Are we all not deserving of love? Can we give of a smile or a positive word of encouragement? Are we so insecure that we hide behind our pride to think we deserve better than the next person? Can we give of our time to each other? Can we give of our money if we can't give of our time? What is it going to take for us to realize that giving is what God wants us to do? These children need a helping hand. Some of the grandchildren wanted to play soccer in an old rice barn that no longer had a roof. And they worked hard and long to try to push that water out so that they could play their game. But the task was daunting and was ultimately discouraging, much like their own lives. Life seems to have dealt these kids a bad hand. They don't have the opportunities that they could have if they were given more chances. But they didn't let the burden discourage them, and they began to play as children do. There was a brief moment in time that they were oblivious to their situations, to life's hard lessons, to poverty, hungry bellies, past family members, lost childhoods. These are their lives, and they do deserve to live and love just as you and I do. What will you gladly give in your life? What will you give to these children? What will you give to each other? How can we reclaim the hope in a generation of children left behind?